you want to know, or did want to know, about flute playing. Our modern flute today comes in three parts. We have a head joint, we have a body joint, and we have a foot joint. And I use this song, and it goes like this. The head joint's connected to the body joint. The body joint's connected to the foot joint. And this is what our modern flute looks like today. Our professional models are usually made out of silver, platinum, and even gold. Most of our student models are made out of nickel, because if our student drops the flute, it doesn't dent as easily as the silver. Now, when I go to play my flute, where do you think the sound comes out?
The side.
The side. Would you come up?
Go ahead, Don.
This is easy.
Go on. Clapping hand for Don.
Yeah, Don, thank you.
All right.
Okay, so if my sound comes out of here, right? If you plug it, I shouldn't be able to play, right? Okay, so do a good job. You got a good plug there? Okay.
That's the side.
Oh, which side?
The front side, right? Not the bottom.
Okay, so it doesn't come out of the bottom. So if I push all these keys down, right?
Okay.
No sound should be able to come out, right?
Right.
Because we blocked it. Okay. Okay, so you want to take one more guess?
Anybody else? Guess
Anybody
where
else
the
want to
sound
take a
comes
guess?
from?
Where does the sound
We
come out?
trust you.
Oh, they're trusting you.
Where? The top.
Yeah, I want you to put your hand here and tell me what you feel.
Oh, there it is. All right.
Yeah, all
There it
right.
is.
Give him a hand.
Right from the mouthpiece.
Yeah. So the most important part of my flute is actually my head joint. Because just like Don, most people think the sound comes out of the bottom, it comes out of the side, it comes out of the keys. Nothing comes out of here. All my sound actually comes out of my head joint here. So I have a very special head joint on my flute. It was made by Albert Cooper, who lives in London, and he makes some of the best head joints in the world. And I'm very fortunate to have one. My flute instructor, who was Julius Baker, went to his shop in London, bought 5 head joints, brought them back, and I just happened to have a flute lesson with him that first morning he was back. And he said, Chris, let's try out all these head joints. And boy, was I happy. And he said, which head joint do you like the best? And I said, I love this one. And he said, okay, it's yours. I was almost in tears. So my head joint comes from London. My body and my foot joint was actually designed by my flute instructor, Julius Baker. And Julius Baker lived right here in Putnam County. He was the first flutist of the New York Phil. And so he designed this part. And then it was shipped to Japan and made by the Yamaha company. Shipped back to here where I bought this particular flute. So this is our modern flute. I can play high. I can play low. I can play low. And I can play anything in between. I'm going to play a piece for you now called The Dance of the Goat. And it's by Honegger. It's for solo flute. It's for a modern flute. And a lot of times when I do this, I find I have artists or I have children in the audience who love to draw. And I ask for volunteers. I have my clipboards over here. There are colored pencils over here. And while I play the Dance of the Goat, if you want to sketch or draw what you think the music is doing, please feel free to come up, help yourself to the clipboards, help yourself to the pencils. Dance of the Goat. Oh, come on, come on. That's why I brought them. You want to draw? No? Okay. That was Dance of the Goat by Honegger. Now, when I tell people that the flute belongs to the woodwind family, they say, okay, Chris, we get it. Wind, not a problem. But what happened to the wood? Your flute's not made out of wood. Originally, over 100 years ago, our flutes were not made out of metal. They were actually made out of wood. And what happened was, as the orchestra got bigger and bigger and bigger, these wood flutes, you couldn't hear them anymore. So somebody got the bright idea, hey, if we make the flute out of metal, maybe it'll be louder, maybe we'll hear it again. Well, it worked. But I really feel there's a place for our wooden flutes, too. And I'm going to show you a wooden flute that was made over 100 years ago. So this is what our wood flute looks like. Once again, we have three parts, the head joint, the body joint, and the foot joint. But it has a much softer sound to it. This flute was actually found here in an antique store in Cold Spring. I was putting my flyers up one day for my concerts, and one of the antique dealers said to me, Chris, I think I have something for you. I thought, what could he have for me? And then he pulled out this old flute case, and my heart started going like this, because I already knew by the flute case how old this flute was. But the problem is with most of the old wooden flutes, they have not been kept well, and so they have big cracks in them. So I opened up the flute case, and the head joint was in great shape. The body joint was in great shape. The foot joint was in great shape, too. I could only play one note, and this was it. I thought, wow, sounds really good. And then I could barely make it out here. But when a flute maker makes his flutes, he will always put his mark on it. And I could barely see it that it was made by the Haynes Company. And the Haynes Company is still in business today up in Boston, and they make some of the best flutes in the world. And I now knew I had a good flute in my hand. And I said to him, do you know the history of this flute? What do you know about it? And he said, the only thing I'm allowed to tell you is a client came in with 3 flutes. He pulled 2 more out, and yeah, I took those 2. And all she wanted was to put it back into the hands of a flutist who would play them again, because her grandfather was the flute maker. So I'm going to play for you today a sonata by Mercandante. Mercandante was around Mozart's time. It comes in 2 movements. And Mercandante would have no knowledge of our modern day flute or flutes being made out of metal. He would have composed it for our wood flute. not bad for over 100 years old.
No luck on Jean-Pierre Rampal, so I've tried everything I can think of.
That's okay. I'll do it solo.
It's reading the other one, so we have no problem with that.
Okay, well, that's good.
Trying to get me?
Now, being a woodwind player, when we play outside, some of our difficulties are, can you imagine when the wind comes by like this? It'll take all my notes, and no matter how hard I blow. So if I'm in the middle of a piece and all of a sudden you don't hear a bunch of notes, chances are good the wind has come by and has taken them. Now, people ask me, do flutes come in different sizes? And yes, they do. Our regular flute looks like this. Our next one down the line looks like this. And this is called an alto flute. And you will see it used mostly in jazz. It was the last flute to be invented. And people often ask me, well, what's this curved head joint about, Chris? And for me, I also have a straight head joint, but when I put the straight head joint on, my arms go out to here and I can't balance it. So I use a curved head joint. And some of you may be saying, hey, that's kind of a nice color on your flute. And I was like, uh-huh. Because my body's made out of gold and my keys on this flute are silver. Originally, I was going to play Claude Bolling, movement from Claude Bolling's Jazz Suite with a CD, but we can't get the CD working, so I'm going to do it as a solo flute. So the alto flute has a very different sound to it than our normal flute. There is even a flute that's bigger than this one, and it's called a bass flute. And unfortunately, I don't own a bass flute. We don't use them very often. This piece by Claude Bolling, it comes from his second jazz suite. And he also wrote a piece for flute, cello, and harp. And many years ago, I wanted to perform this piece by Claude Bolling. And I couldn't find it anywhere. I searched, I looked, I asked people everywhere, where can I find this music? It's a beautiful piece. And I was sitting home, and the fax machine went off. And I thought, I wasn't expecting a fax. So I went over, and it was actually from Claude Bolling himself. He said, somebody gave me your request for my music. It has not been published. So I'm Xeroxing my score right now. I'm sending it to you. Please do the U.S. premiere of it. So I got to do the U.S. premiere of his piece called La Princess. So if you've not heard about Claude Bolling, you should go look up some of his music. He's kind of a cross between the classical and the jazz. So now I'm going back to a wood flute, and you'll notice it doesn't have a lot of keys on it, does it? No, because now we're going back further. When wood flutes were just made out of wood, and first we added this key, and it stayed this way for a very, very long time. This is a traditional Irish flute. And it wasn't until the late 1800s that Theobald Bain finally came up with our modern key system. So this is an Irish flute, and once again, the head joint's connected to the body joint's connected to the foot joint. And I'm going to play a traditional Celtic piece for you called the Skyboat Song. So there's your traditional Irish flute. Now, people always seem to like to ask me, Chris, where do you come from? Putnam County. No, where were you before Putnam County? Putnam County? Oh, well, where do your parents come from? Putnam County. Well, what about your grandparents? Putnam County. And some of them came from Europe. What about your great-grandparents? Putnam County. And then they'd start to get a little agitated with me. And they say, okay, where did your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents come from? Putnam County. Because my ancestry goes right back to the Native American Indians here in Putnam County. And I'm going to share with you now some Native American Indian flutes. The Native American Indian flutes are all made out of wood, and instead of blowing across like this, I actually blow into it, and all my sound comes out of here. There's a little hole underneath this, and we call this the bird in the nest. The nest is actually the hole with the bird on top of it. This is a Native American Indian courting flute, and it plays very softly, because my ancestors would not have lived in a teepee. They would have lived in a longhouse here on the banks of the Hudson River. And they would, if a young man was interested in a young girl, he would go outside of the longhouse at night to serenade that young girl. So he would play very softly because he didn't want to wake up the dad. You know, that was bad news. But if he did wake up the dad, there on a courting flute, they have something called a loon call. And it sounds like this. And it's supposed to sound like a loon, and if the father woke up, oh, it's just the loons, I'm going back to sleep. So this is what a courting flute sounds like. It's very soft. It's just a whisper of a flute. The Native American Indians, we do have flutes that are louder. Once again, you'll notice it's made out of wood. We have the bird sitting on the nest, but because it's longer, more round, it's a lot louder. And then the Native American Indians, we have flutes that look like this. And these are called double flutes. And on one side of the flute is what we call the drone, just like a bagpipe, plays one note. Over here is our regular Native American Indian flute. And when you put it together with a drone, I think it's pretty spectacular. Now I happen to have two because I was out in the Midwest and I played that one and I liked it a lot. And then I played this one and I thought, oh, maybe this one's better. Which one do you like? Okay, so I spent 40 minutes going back and forth between the two, and my family just looked at me and said, Mom, you're hopeless. Please buy both. So they both came back with me. I also brought some Native American Indian instruments with me that are not flutes. This is called a rain stick. Have you ever seen the rain sticks before? Okay. When the Native American Indians flip our rain sticks, it sounds like rain, and we believe it's going to bring rain, Del, but it's not going to bring rain today. This is originally made out of cactus with the thorns going out like this. And what the Native American Indians do is we hit the thorns on the inside. We let the seeds dry of the cactus, and it's actually the seeds going down through the thorns that make that wonderful water rain sound. I also brought a selection of Native American Indian rattles with me. And when a Native American Indian kills an animal, we must use everything on that animal. So this Native American Indian had killed some turtles, and I actually had turtle soup with him that afternoon. But he could not just throw the shell away. That's not allowed. So he had to make something from it. So he made me a rattle. The Indians will use whatever they have around. In this tribe, they only had wood, so they made a rattle out of wood. This one came back from Alaska with me, and you'll notice the antlers. But once again, could not throw them away. They had to make something from them. And of course, where would we be without our drums? This is made out of a hide. It has the design of Kokopelli. He was a famous Native American Indian flutist, actually, he was. He was a hunchback. So the Indians thought he possessed special powers, and he went from tribe to tribe to tribe to tribe, telling stories and singing songs. So all the tribes got to know each other's songs and stories. Now, you may say, Chris, why'd you bring all this stuff? I brought it for you. Because in our longhouses at night, we would tell stories, tell legends, tell tales to our young children so they could learn lessons. And today, I want to do a story called More About Little People. But I need everybody's help. I need some people to come up, take the drums, some to take the rattles, and some to take the rain sticks. Come on. So, the rain sticks are here, the rattles are here, I've got drums here. Here's your mallet. You can be a drum player. Rain sticks. Great. And if you're a rattle, if you could stay together, if you're a rain stick, if you could group together, if you're drums, if you could group together. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. This story has a boy in it. Every time he says the word boy, he's going to pause for a moment and we're going to hear the drums. Whenever Grandma comes in, our rattles back there are going to be Grandma. And anytime you hear water mentioned, you're going to flip our rain sticks.
So why doesn't everybody come up right in front of the stage?
Okay.
Everybody come on up.
So we get into the,
Grandma?
And then where it says stop, that's where you're going to stop.
so whenever it's boy, grandma, I stop and let them, and
Yeah.
blue?
If blue is water, I highlighted it all.
Okay.
Okay, are you ready for the legend of the Longhouse? More about little people.
Dear Shaniwa, in our next legend, we will continue on the little people that we have written just the other day. It is something that must be included, otherwise it will not be complete. The accompanying pictures will illustrate this subject. The legend tells us about the life and habits of the strange but powerful little people. Now, we will begin here as follows. In the olden times, when my people lived more or less with nature's own way, when they were able to converse with animals, when strange things happened, when great beasts and birds were common, these little people lived in various modes of habitation. They were very close friends of the Onwi Onwa, or our real humans, as we are called. They made contact with our people in many different ways. To us, they are known as the Dijo Jin Un, and were considered very powerful, even though they were very small. They had a way of making friends to little boys. With our people, often taking them from their homes, which may be someplace among the rocky places or the caves. One of the legends tells of all the Indian boys about the age of 7 were out hunting birds. He had his little bow and arrow to shoot what he may seem, as was the custom of those days, to teach the growing boys all the sports of the hunt and the chase of the major part of their early training. It was their school time. This little boy was wandering on when he finally came to a river. He had no sooner reached the edge of the water when he heard a swishing noise in the direction of the upstream. Looking up, he was surprised to see a tiny canoe shoot around the bend of the stream at a rapid speed. In the canoe were two of the tiniest little men the boy had ever seen. They came right up to where the boy stood and stopped. Both had a tiny bow and a quiver of arrows. They both greeted the boy when one of them asked him, "How would you like to trade your bow and arrows with one of us?" Then the boy thought, how foolish would it be to do so, as their bows and arrows are much smaller than his. So he said, how foolish it would be to do so. Why, yours are so much smaller than mine. Then one of them took a bow and stung it, and making an arrow, he shot it straight up. The arrow disappeared into the sky and did not come down at all, saying at the same time, that may be true, but all great things on earth are not always the biggest. You may live to learn that. Then they took their canoe paddles and with one stroke disappeared around the bend of the river. The boy was so surprised that he went back to his home, where he was staying with his grandmother. He told her about what had happened. Then his grandmother scolded the grandson, saying, "You made a big mistake by your refusal to accept the trade. Had you taken one of their bows and arrows, you could take any game that you desired, as they are magic. Thereafter, never be too hasty in judging people as you see them, for you may never know who or what they may be. This is one legend, and there are others."
Great job. Thank you for making that possible.
That was wonderful.
So you should never judge a book by its cover. Okay, so we've seen our modern flute, we've seen wooden flutes, we've seen big flutes, and now I'm going to the smallest flute that we have. It's called the piccolo. And I really like the power the piccolo has. When I walk into the orchestra with this, even the brass players say to me, "Fear the piccolo." And that's because the piccolo plays so high that no matter how loud the orchestra plays, I can outdo them all with this teeny tiny little instrument. Sometimes you'll see piccolos made out all metal, all silver. Sometimes you will see them made all out of wood. My orchestral piccolo, which I left at home today because it doesn't like being outside, is all wood. this one has a metal head joint, actually has a plastic body, and it's made for marching band. Because in marching bands, sometimes you get into bad weather, and I could take this out in bad weather and nothing is going to happen to it. So I'm going to close with a very famous march done by, composed by John Philip Sousa, called The Stars and Stripes Forever. The Stars and Stripes Forever is the only march that is our national march, was honored on a postage stamp, and it is over the tombstone of John Philip Sousa. John Philip Sousa actually wrote this down on paper in 1896 on Christmas Day. He actually heard it before in his head. He was coming back from Europe because he was on a European tour, found out that his business manager had passed away. He got back on a ship as quickly as he could, back to America here. And while on that ship, it said he heard this band in his head, and he heard this whole thing, the Stars and Stripes Forever. He named it the Stars and Stripes Forever because when he got back on American shore, he was so happy to see our American flag again. There's a little bit of a story behind the Stars and Stripes Forever. The hit tune in the trio, John Philip Sousa said, represented the North. The piccolo represents the South. And the rowdy trombones represented the West in our country. Also, the Stars and Stripes is used in the circus. Anybody know what it's used for in the circus? Okay, if the circus has a disaster, the band starts playing the Stars and Stripes Forever, and that tells everybody, get out of the tent. All the performers help everybody get out, but we have a disaster on our hands and to get out. So here is the Stars and Stripes Forever by John Philip Sousa. And I want to thank Del for having me here today. And I hope you have enjoyed this show of flutes from all time periods from all around the world. Thank you.
Notice, I'm moving the mic away. Hear the piccolo. Does anybody have any questions for me? Anything you're dying to know about playing flute or being a musician or? Oh, thank you.
How did you find the flute of all the instruments?
Okay, so I have 4 older brothers, okay? And they're about 10 years older than me.
Uh-huh.
And when the last one went off to college, I felt very lonely because I was very close with my brothers. They always played with me. And he was a flutist. And he left his flute behind. Big mistake. Because I went into his room and I said, you know what? I miss my brother so much. I'm going to play flute just like he does. And I put it together, and that was it. Actually, flute was not my first instrument. My first instrument was actually tuba. My eldest brother decided his senior year of high school, you know, he wanted a better college application and decided he better become part of the band. And he's a big guy, so the band director gave him a tuba. And he brought it home, set it up in his room, and he said to me, "Don't touch my tuba." So after dinner, I walked down the hall, and there was his bedroom, and there was this big tuba. I was like, oh, nobody's ever going to hear me. So I snuck into his room, and I stood on my tippy toes. I could just reach the mouthpiece. I started going, boom, 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 boom. And he couldn't get a sound out of it, okay? So he starts yelling at my brother who plays flute, "Get off my tuba!" And my other brother said, "Ha, I'm not on your tuba." And then everybody looked around because there was only one person missing. Well, needless to say, I almost didn't live to see 6 because my brother was so upset with me because he couldn't get a sound out of it and I could. And looking back, I tell my parents, you should have known then you had a musician. Any other questions for me? No? You don't want to know anything else?
Did you always know of your Native American roots?
Yeah, right from the beginning. My dad's half Irish and half American Indian, and my mom's half Swedish and half German. So we knew right from the get-go. So it was nothing, no news here to us. We knew, and it was interesting because when I was at Juilliard, I used to commute from Brewster to go to Juilliard, and we had a whole weekend of concerts. And my friend who lived closer to the city said, "Come stay at my house tonight." You know, so you don't have the big commute. And I thought, oh, that'd be lovely. And I showed up at her house, and I didn't know what her dad did. And all of a sudden, I heard yelling out from the kitchen, "Don't let Chris touch that human skeleton on the couch. I just got done putting it together." And I'm looking down. Here's this human skeleton. I was like ready to run out the door. He's like, "Hold on, Chris, hold on." He said, "I'm an anthropologist, and this is what I do for a living. I put skeletons back together." I thought, oh, okay. And he said, "Let me guess your heritage." And I thought, ooh, this is going to be good because everybody misses the Native American Indian. And I thought, okay. So he started studying my face and studying it. And he said, "Okay, well, let's start off with Native American Indian." I went, "How did you know that?" And he said, "Well, all I have to do is replace your light skin with a darker skin, blonde hair with black hair." And he said, "All your cheekbones and all this bone structure here, that's all Native American Indian." And then he said, "Then you're Swedish, German, and Irish." I was like, wow, was he good. So yeah, I always knew about my Native American Indian roots. So it's been kind of neat. Any other questions?
Are there Native American students that you study with, or
I have not,
Karaoke
tech-
Kai, or
yeah, technically, he's a great Native American Indian flutist. I have not technically studied with any of them, but I've listened to their recordings. And when I retire I also teach elementary school music. This is my 31st year of teaching. I'm hoping to actually go take some lessons with some of them because I would like to be a better Native American Indian flutist than what I am today. I would like to know more about that culture. But that's going to have to wait until I retire. Any other questions?
Is the flute the same as the piccolo, the notes?
Yeah. It has the same fingering. The piccolo tends to be a little bit more temperamental, and it's a little more fussy. So with a piccolo, you really got to be right on. There's no wiggle room with this tiny thing. So if you're going to be a piccolo player, you got to be brave, and you've got to be really, really careful and really, really accurate. Anything else you want to know?
Well,
Okay, well, thank you for coming. And I want to thank Dale for having me here today. And go and enjoy the sculptures. Thank you.
You're pretty awesome. Thank you.
Oh,
So
thank
Jim
you.
and I will do a little, I'm gonna call Jim and, you have a,